Hello, everyone. I'm Rosalind Romero.
And I'm Tessa Hughes.
And you're listening to Body Language, a podcast where we dive into the taboo, dissecting women's health and sexuality.
From masturbation to what type of birth control is right for you to scheduling an appointment with the OBGYN, we've got you covered.
We are two college seniors who are exploring topics we wish we knew when we started school all those years ago.
We want to give you a specific space to explore these topics with us. On today's episode, we're talking sex toys.
That's right. We're going to hear from fellow college students about what their favorite sex toys are and sit down with a local sex therapist to learn how you can bring sex toys into the bedroom.
We'll also take a look into queer sex and wrap it up with the 5 top-rated sex toys and how to care for them. So let's jump in. To kick off our show today, we asked young women and a few men what their favorite sex toys were and why, just to see what kind of popular is right now and what is making the rounds in our age demographic.
So let's hear what they had to say.
I would say that my favorite sex toy is the dual vibrating massager. I believe the producer is the brand Plus One, but I actually purchased it at Target, and I think that's why it's my favorite. I like that Target made it more accessible for people to get sex toys because I think it's something that shouldn't be so stigmatized.
I love to use my massive vibrating rabbit. I think bigger the better, and it's really fun to use with my partner.
So my favorite toy is the Cal Exotic Butterfly Kiss vibrator because it is rechargeable, which is very useful, and I really like that it has both internal and external stimulation and different speeds, so there's kind of something for everybody, I guess. And I really like that it also is pink and cute, and you know, it's not like a big old scary sex toy.
What is my favorite sex toy? I say as I pass by this church. Well, that's easy. Has to be the Tracy's dog, and for one simple reason, which it satisfies me more than anyone, particularly any man ever could.
My favorite sex toy is actually from Target. It's the Plus One dual vibrating massager. So it's internal and external, and it's really cute. It's pink, and I think it just, it works great. And definitely no complaints. I think it's just one of the better vibrators I've ended up using.
It's like a pocket pussy, and I used it because me and my ex were not comfortable doing intercourse, and that was kind of a second option. Yeah, so it was pretty good, and I feel like we were able to get intimate and also be safe too.
To be honest, it's pretty basic, just a regular dildo. It's really, I feel like it's obviously not the real thing, but it gets the job done.
I think my favorite sex toy is a vibrator. I don't know, it's the only one. I have 2 vibrators, but it's the only ones that I had. And when I used to be in a long distance relationship, it came in handy a lot. And it's also just good for if I just would rather finish myself off instead of my partner.
So the reason that I bought the Rose vibrator is because I saw all these reviews of girls being we couldn't even go past the first setting, and there's 10 settings, it's so insane, best orgasm of my life, when deaf while using it, all this funny shit. And so I was you know what, I have to buy it. So I bought it, and I can attest to the fact that it is definitely one of the best, if not the best vibrator out there on the market. It's amazing, it's travel size, it's tiny, it's a little rose that can fit in your hand, and it suctions while it vibrates, and yeah, I just orgasm all the time. It's the best, and it will make you disappointed with human sex, but it's okay because now you can have even better sex by yourself.
After hearing all those recommendations, it sounds like I have some more shopping to do.
Me too. And Rose and I actually sat down recently with a local sex therapist to dive even deeper into sex toys, most specifically how to incorporate them in the bedroom with your partner rather than just as a solo act.
Today, we're excited to have on our show Chris Rodebush, a therapist located in San Luis Obispo, California. Chris received her master's in clinical psychology from Antioch University in Santa Barbara and is certified through the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists.
Her work is focused on couples, gender-affirming care, sexual assault, and intimate partner violence, life transitions, sex therapy, and intimacy challenges, which is exactly what we're here to talk with her today. Chris, how you doing?
So good.
Thank you so much for joining us.
So why don't we start off with having you explain in your own words a little bit more on how you run your practice?
Yeah, so I run my practice. So I have a private practice located just outside of downtown SLO. It's actually a part-time practice, and I work with individuals and couples, teen through, well, as old as you could get, right? And I work, like you said, in intimacy work predominantly, and also have a background in working with survivors of sexual assault and intimate partner violence.
That's amazing.
Just off the bat, what are some common miscommunications that people have regarding sex in relationships?
Yeah, and I got a chuckle reading through this one before because the first thing that came to mind as far as miscommunications is just no communications. So when it comes to communication, the biggest thing that I talk about is that people aren't talking about it. And when they do, it's often now a big deal. And so rather than having lots of conversations that are non-threatening or just with great ease, now it's a big deal and there's a lot of stress and worry. And so the biggest miscommunication is no communication. Additionally, as far as miscommunications go, being terrified that the feedback that will be received poorly. So you want to talk to your sexual partner about something and being terrified that however you share it, no matter how you share it, because they're going to be ultra sensitive to it and it's going to be not received well. And then just as far as miscommunications or misunderstandings go, that there's a right or wrong amount of times that you should be having sex. And then anytime you use the word should, pretty much no go, right? And then who should be initiating sex, and then kind of that sex should stay the same over the years and as you age.
So kind of going off that, how do you help couples like facilitate those conversations, or what would you recommend to people that are like struggling to have those conversations with their partners?
Yeah, so these are not skills that we are taught in school, and it's our sex education predominantly what we receive, because sex education is what we receive in school, but it's also things that we learn from our friends, from our culture, from our religion, from our families. And it's often leaning heavily on reproduction or STIs or abstaining. And so it's really basic communication skills. It's being able to be vulnerable with your partner, know that you are coming from a loving stance and a desire to know more. So can you share with your partner, I'm interested in what's going on. And I want to learn, and I'm not sure. And so really removing any type of blame and coming at it with curiosity and love and interest is one of the first things that I'm going to talk about with my couples.
And then what would you say some of the common not issues, but like you see like common, like reoccurring things that kind of come up with the couples that you see?
Yeah, and I work with couples, but I work with a lot of individuals, and often work starts with an individual, and then we may bring in a partner, or starts with a couple, and then I do individual work. Differences in desire and arousal is a big heavy hitter. And that's pretty common in the work that I do. Communication issues, lack of education, like I talked about, pain during sex or penetration. Disconnect, kind of an experience that people have like during sex where they realize they're not really connected with their body or the partner, or they kind of check out, and inability to have an orgasm. And so that's a running list, but often those themes will be found, they overlap. So communication issues will be found with almost all of those things, and education issues will be found with almost all of those things as well.
And then, so, because you touched on like the communication, the education, but like what do you recommend to your clients for the other kind of like issues that you mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, that's like an hour-long conversation. I mean, there's a couple books that I really love and recommend. My favorite for people who have vaginas is Come As You Are. And that does a ton of education, and specifically for people with vaginas who know I have this thing, there's something wrong with me, and they read this book, and if nothing else, they're like, oh, I'm normal. Oh, I'm normal. And people want to feel like they are normal, and 95% of the time they are totally normal. They're going through a normal life experience, but they just don't know it's normal because nobody has talked about it.
It's so interesting that you mentioned the whole am I normal question, because I mean, that has always been a question for me growing up, even just as a young woman and someone who was taught mostly abstinence sort of conversations. So yeah, I that's just super interesting to me how that question, it's just so pervasive, and it's just, I feel like especially people with vaginas can be very insecure about how it should look down there or things like that.
This is like a little example of that, and please let me know if this is too detailed. Like
no such thing.
Okay. Yes, but women have natural secretions out of their vagina throughout different times of their cycle, and it's often gives us clue about where we are at in our menstrual cycle. But I remember, like, personally and through stories from friends, when you start asking around, there's a time in your life you're like, what the fuck is that? Like, what is in my underpants? Like, I think Amy Schumer had a joke about, like, it looks like somebody sneezed, and so like, not knowing what that is and what is normal and what's not normal, and then, like, okay, if it's a certain way, then you do need to talk to a doctor because you might have an infection. But otherwise, like, that's just a normal part of your body. It's like an oven self-cleaning process, right?
Right.
And so,
right.
Like, but if you don't know that, you may live wondering, like, thinking that is gross or that something's wrong with your body. But like a little piece of information like that can be like, oh, I'm normal. This happens to literally anyone with a vagina, or most people with a vagina. It can be really reassuring.
So you mentioned you have clients of, like, all ages. Is that normal, or is this normal for me ever go away, or is it like not go away, but like at what point do you see kind of like the switch?
No. I mean, I have women in their 50s I'm telling them very basic things that are normal, and then what makes me honestly really sad is, like, there is a belief that you are not normal and you are living with feelings of disgust or shame for decades and decades and decades and decades. And that makes me really sad. And so there's a beautiful element of being a therapist to have a client finally stop feeling crappy about themselves or like something is wrong with them, and to feel free and like their body is okay. And society or maybe their partner is saying that something's wrong, but maybe nothing is actually wrong.
So what would be one of the first steps to kind of like alleviate that shame, or like if girls were looking to, like, young girls were looking to like start actively working to get away from that?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and it's an age-old question, which is one, just saying the words that is normal. And that happens to a lot of people, or that is a very common thing, can be one very simple step in that process. And then also looking for the roots of that shame, because sometimes those roots are based on interactions that they had. So, for example, if a woman had an experience where, as a child, like, self-pleasuring is something that sometimes just happens naturally as a child. You don't even know what it is, but you're like, if I do this one thing, it feels really good. And if you have a parent walk in, let's say, to your bedroom and see you doing that as a child and have a really negative experience, like, reaction to that, that will stick often, right? Just this one little thing. And then that carries with you this element of shame or disgust around a certain action. And so when we are able to go back through history and start unpacking narratives from their family or from your religion that you may believe in still, or you may not believe in, but you still are holding on to those narratives, then you can start choosing to no longer recognize those narratives in your life.
I think one of the questions that I've always had in regards to specifically, because we're talking about masturbation and sex toys and whatnot. So what are some common issues that your clients have brought up about, just bringing sex toys into the bedroom? I feel like one of the things, for example, one of the things that I've heard from previous partners I've had is, oh, am I not enough?
Oh, yeah. And so this is one of those things I could easily get on a soapbox about. But because when I hear that, it makes me think of, where did you learn that, one, you have to be enough, right? And that is often, not always, but I'm going to say, like, it's often a male or, like, cis male narrative that comes from this notion that they need to be this sexual provider that has to do all the things and know all the things, which means that, it's really a hindrance, which means they can't ask questions. Toys are not allowed because it threatens their masculinity, right? And so, unfortunately, it may lead in a heterosexual relationship. It may lead to the female partner like having to explain and do that education that, well, you know what? I looked up the stat because I forgot. Like, 36% of women, this is cis women, reported that clitoral stimulation helped them orgasm during intercourse, and slightly more than 18% reported orgasming from intercourse alone, right? 18%, less than 20% can have an orgasm without extra stimulation. And so, and it may come down of like, babe, do you want me to have an orgasm?
Right.
Yes or no, right? And I know this toy here does the job. and there's nothing wrong with you or your bits or your moves. They're all great. But this little guy really helps. So, like, I want us to have really great sex, and I know you want me to have an orgasm just as much as you want to have an orgasm. I don't know if it's just as much, but, and so like, can we, like, introduce this as a way to add to our experience? So, rather than you are not enough, it's a bonus. It's a way to improve versus making up for something that is lacking. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any toys or like ones that you recommend your clients or that you say are like good or like more like, I guess, like oriented towards like more like partner sex versus?
Yeah, I don't have any like fan favorites that I recommend to everyone, but I really encourage people to kind of explore, and if some people feel more comfortable exploring on their own and then experimenting on their own and then bringing that to the partnership, and other people might not feel like they don't have a regular self-pleasuring practice, and for whatever reason, and there are many, they might feel more comfortable doing it as a couple. So they can go online or go to a shop together, and like you can make it like a little adventure. Like, let's go
bonding
pick
experience.
Yeah,
Right.
Like, I had a couple of years ago that was like once a month we pick a new toy, and yeah, and some months are like I get to choose, some months he gets to choose. And they choose together, right? And so that's a way to kind of remove the stigma. And they could be like, some of them like we try once and we're like, nah. And some of them are in there like they circle through pretty often. They're like, oh, the purple one, get the purple one. And so you never know. Some things work better than others. And then some might be kind of on the edge for both of them, and so it may be a test of vulnerability of, like, for example, like anal play is not something that a lot of folks are openly talking about, but there's a lot to be learned and explored in that area. And so if a couple was like, let's educate ourselves and explore this and try a couple toys and we'll start small and build up together, that's something that, again, you can do together or you can do independently.
Would you say there's any, like, the media maybe, like, because obviously there's, like, guys feeling like they're not enough, but also, like, I know, like, 50 Shades of Grey was really big a couple years ago, so that might, like, have, like, misconstrued that, like, bringing sex in the bedroom is strictly for, like, BDSM and is more of a violent thing versus...
Interesting. I haven't read it or seen it. I think that's a little bit of a, like, I will not. Not that it's a terrible, but... Yeah, did it open doors to other things out there? Sure. And I appreciate that it did that. But just as cis men may have narratives about how they should be, cis women also have the same, or just people in general have expectations of how they are supposed to react. And so there are a myriad of social pressures that we get, and how we should, and I'm using air quotes, how we should be at sex, and how we are supposed to respond when our partner wants sex, and how we are supposed to enjoy sex. And those are not always congruent with our own experiences.
Have any of your clients talked about the role of porn in how they view their bodies, and how they view masturbation, and how they view sex with their partner, or even toys?
Oh my gosh, so much. And I talk about porn a lot, especially during developmental stages of their life, because if that is what they saw at a young age, it may influence how they expect sex to be, right? And what you are interested in porn is not congruent and not the same as what you are interested in real life. And so you may experiment and have a totally different life in your personal self-pleasuring masturbation than you do in your actual intimate sex life with a partner. But it certainly can affect how you feel about your body. It can make you feel really crummy about your performance. It can set unrealistic expectations of sexual partners. That like, oh, if I do this move, it's going to make them go crazy. And maybe that's true and maybe it's not. And then, and so there is certainly a place for porn, but yes, it can create some pretty unrealistic expectations of what sex is.
And then, is there anything else you would like to add on like this topic in general, or we might have forgotten?
Yeah. So some misconception. Wow, I said misconception.
Freudian slip a little bit.
I love. No, it's so fitting.
It's so fitting. Misconceptions. That's really what we're talking about, is misconceptions. So one thing that I wish if I could scream from the mountaintops, is responsive and spontaneous desire. Have either of you ever heard of that?
I have not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm going to give you a 2-minute overview of spontaneous versus responsive desire. So spontaneous desire is when you think about sex out of the clear blue sky. And you're like, oh man, you're walking down the street and you're like, ooh, I want to have sex right now. Or I'm going to go home and see my honey and make some sweet love. And spontaneous desire is, you may not think about sex on a day-to-day basis, but when you're cuddling on the couch with your partner, watching a movie, and they start rubbing your back or playing with your hair or start kissing you, then you start to warm up to the idea. Traditionally, and I'm using generalizations, men are more likely to have spontaneous desire. Cis men and cis women are more likely to have responsive desire. And this kind of coincides with the narrative that men, I'm going to use air quotes again, have higher sex drives and women have, quote, lower sex drives. But and first of all, sex is not a drive. I want to set the record straight. It's not a drive. And what it really means is that men may have more spontaneous desire, but one is not better than the other. And I think society puts a heavy weight, and being spontaneous is more desired than being a responsive desire. But so I want to just say, like, if you have responsive desire, that doesn't mean you don't have a sex drive. That doesn't mean that you don't have desire. It just means you probably have less spontaneous desire. And it may just mean that your partner needs to be the initiator more often than not because you are not wanting of sex. It's just not coming out of the clear blue sky for you.
And you talked a lot about, like, cis men are the ones that are, so do you work with clients that are, or couples that are part of the LGBTQ plus community?
Yeah.
And, like, how does that differentiate in, like, your treatment with them? And things like that?
I mean, I'm trying to be careful when in my speaking, because when I try not to be super binary but there are generalizations that you need to make, and so that's why I'm saying cis. because I do work with a number of trans and non-binary clients, and their sexual evolution can look a lot of different ways. And in some regards, it's the same as cis individuals. I would say that often the queer community has a little bit more opening to explore and talk about it, where assumptions are made more in the cis community of this is just the way you are. And so folks, and I know I'm talking about queer community and trans community overlapping, and they are distinct differences. But a trans individual or non-binary individual still has to understand their sexuality as much as any cis individual does. And that translates into intimacy and communication and all of the things that we have been talking about as well. And they experience similar desire issues. Mm-hmm.
Kind of wanted to go back a little bit where you said something about sex isn't a drive. Is it okay if you can explain that language a little bit?
Yeah. So a drive is a biological function. So I have a drive to eat when I'm hungry, and I have a drive to urinate to expel waste from my body. It's a needed thing that your body tells you to do in order to survive. And sex is not something that you have to do in order to just like survive as a human being. And I think that narrative ties into this notion, how do I say this? It ties into a notion that sex is something that is needed and perhaps owed to somebody. And I don't, owed is a strong word. But that for some reason, if they don't have it, they will die, right? But I mean, if you've heard certain people talk about it, it seems like they're going to die if they don't get laid. And that is just not a truth.
It may feel like it.
It may feel like it, but you will survive, and you have the ability to take care of yourself. So if it's at that, one more small note on that is that a lot of folks have a tie to sex is far more than this physical act. Well, almost all. That is true for all people. But they have their own worth and their desire, feeling desired by a partner and feeling loved. It's like they put a lot of eggs in that basket. So when they are not having sex with a partner, and they feel like they're gonna die, it's not because they're just a horn dog that just wants more sex and they're greedy. It's because they're feeling unloved and uncared for and undesired by their partner, because they put so many eggs in that basket that is the method in which they feel all of those things. And so when that's not there, then they have a big gap. They have a vacancy in their heart or in the relationship.
I don't think I have anything else other than, if our listeners are interested, how can they find you?
Yeah. So I have a website, which is Chris Therapy Slow, KRIS, Therapy Slow. That's the best way to find me. I'm on Psychology Today as well. But yeah, get out there, educate yourself, and take care of your body. And guess what? You're normal.
One of the reasons many people use sex toys is because it helps them orgasm. This is important because there's something called an orgasm gap.
The orgasm gap, or pleasure gap, is a term coined by University of Florida professor Lori Mintz. She wrote the book Becoming Clitorate: Why Orgasm Equality Matters and How to Get It. She describes it as the difference in how frequently people orgasm depending on their sex and sexuality.
According to a study published in 2017 from the International Academy of Sex Research, straight women come last, literally. In a sample of more than 50,000 people in the U.S., 95% of heterosexual men said they usually or always orgasm during sex, followed by 89% of gay men, 86% of lesbian women, and at just 65% is heterosexual women.
Yikes. Mintz pins the blame on media images of sex, especially in porn. She also says there is a cultural overprivileging of male sexuality and a devaluing of female sexuality.
So that leads us to the question now, how can we make sex more queer? Or in other words, how can heterosexual sex close the orgasm gap?
Joining us now is fourth year environmental earth and soil sciences student Rory Dinkins, who uses he, they pronouns. He identifies as queer and is here to give us more insight on sex toys, sex, and everything in between. Hey, Rory.
Hi.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for our podcast. We're just going to kind of jump right in with the questions. So in your experience, how does sex with cisgender heterosexual partners differ from trans, non-binary, or queer partners?
I've typically found that a lot of cisgender or heterosexual partners are a bit more unaware of how to interact with different bodies, different genitalia than they might have experienced in the past. They might not know how to touch partners in a way that's comfortable with them and their gender dysphoria. And then more queer or other trans people that I've interacted with are just a bit more aware of boundaries and are much more observant of consent, and they're much more likely to ask what's comfortable with you, and just are a bit more aware of what you might be experiencing.
I think as a follow-up question to that is, how can cis or heterosexual or even both partners make their partners who may be trans or non-binary or queer, how can they make them feel more comfortable during sex? And, what are some ways that, people who might not have that understanding of genitalia or gender identities, how can they help out?
Yeah, I think one major thing for me is asking your partner what terminology is best appropriate for their genitalia or their body and what makes them comfortable and what affirms their gender. Using the right words can really make a world of difference in the bedroom, and I think that a lot of people don't think about that before sex.
And you mentioned consent too, and how some are more comfortable asking for consent. And I know some people struggle with initiating those conversations. Do you have any advice or tips on how to make that transition more comfortable just for people that kind of struggle to bring it up?
Yeah, I think that offering something of yourself first, making your boundaries clear to your partner, can make the conversation easier just by saying, hey, this is what makes me comfortable. Do you want to talk about what makes you comfortable in the bedroom? Can really change how you interact with each other.
Mm-hmm. So I saw some statistics on how in a lot of cis heterosexual sexual encounters, usually orgasming is not really as much of a priority for, especially say if there is a female or a woman partner, than it is for the man. And then in more gay sex or queer sex, it's a lot more common for there to be an equal understanding of wanting to make the other person orgasm and, just kind of prioritizing pleasure on both ends rather than just on one end. So how can we make sex more queer, I guess?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it's interesting in two ways, because in one way, I know a lot of queer people who actually don't pay much attention to orgasming. There's some queer people that giving pleasure is much more important than receiving pleasure, and that's just receiving it isn't a priority to them, but giving it is what makes it enjoyable. But on the other hand, I know a lot of queer people that are very into reciprocation and focusing on making sure both partners are happy in the bedroom. And I think that both ways are important of having sex, and it's about determining what is the purpose of sex for you as a couple or a group or whoever you're having sex with, figuring out what do you want out of it. And I think that if the goal is for everyone to feel really good, then finding out the best way to do that for everybody is what makes it important and fun, I think, in the long run.
Mm-hmm. So why do you think so many heterosexual people hesitate to bring sex toys into the bedroom?
I think that a lot of straight people sort of see it as, oh, this is what I'm given, that's what we have to work with, and they don't think that anything else can, make it better, or they think that it's just not worth figuring out in the long run. And I think that a lot of queer people know that some things work better than what we're given, and some things are beneficial to making your partner feel good. And I think that queer people are a bit more open to expanding what they utilize.
So in your experience, do you have any favorite sex toys that you've used or things you would recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, I personally, for people with bottom growth, I find that like air pulse stimulating toys are really interesting, and I think they can be really gender affirming. I think that there are a lot of ones that need to have a bigger like opening for bottom growth. I personally think the brand Satisfyer is pretty good. There are some of their air pulse stimulator toys have bigger openings for bottom growth, which is really good. There's also some toys that are strap-ons, but they're strapless strap-ons, and so there's part of it that is inserted, and then you can use it as a strap-on, and that can also be really gender affirming for trans masc people. And it also provides stimulation that is different from just a strap-on, like a traditional strap-on.
I think for some of our listeners who don't really know what bottom growth is it okay if you can kind of explain that just for a little bit?
Yeah. So for some trans masculine people who are on testosterone, the clitoris likely will grow within even just the first few shots or applications of testosterone, whichever method of application you use.
Mm-hmm. So bottom growth is essentially kind of a bigger clitoris, if you will.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Awesome. Anything else that you'd like to share for our podcast? Anything you'd want our listeners to know?
I think it's just great to talk about sex in an open and honest way. I think that many people can learn to just know more about your own body and share that with your partner and be honest about what you're looking for, and you can get a better experience out of it.
All right. Now that we've touched on bringing toys into the bedroom and how to make sex more queer, let's get into the nitty gritty. What types of sex toys are out there?
Well, there's the vibrators.
Love those. I will say I'm a proud vibrator owner. The one I have at home has a little section and a super tiny tongue to stimulate the clit. It also has multiple settings so I can control the intensity.
And then let's not forget about those dildos, which come in different sizes and shapes. Some are smooth, some are veiny, some are short and girthy, while others are long and slender. Some dildos vibrate while others thrust, and others are used manually.
And of course, we can't forget about the other hole, the butt. There are anal plugs, which are usually called butt plugs. There's also anal beads, prostate massagers, and dildos with a wide base.
And Rose, why is that wide base important?
So glad you asked, Tessa. Well, let's put it this way. Deep inside the vagina is a cervix. It's like a dead end to the vaginal canal. So it's extremely rare for something to get stuck inside. But with the anus, a toy can slip in and get stuck.
And as some people say, no flared base, gone without a trace.
Exactly.
What should someone do if they get a butt plug stuck up there?
Well, a couple things. They could either push it out, use a finger and lots of lube to dig it out, or if all else fails, they may have to go to the emergency room.
Yikes. Well, for people out there with penises, there are also sleeves. There's something called strokers, masturbation sleeves, or penis sleeves. You may have heard people call them fleshlights or pocket pussies.
So how do strokers work?
They're actually soft tubes that someone can put their penis into. Some vibrate and some suck the penis. And then there's even specially made strokers for intersex or trans people with a bigger clit or smaller penis.
Speaking of penises, there's also penis rings. Some people call them cock rings, erectile dysfunction rings, or constriction rings.
And what do those do?
So cock rings can help an erection last longer by slowing blood flow out of the penis. There are vibrating ones, and they could be silicone, rubber, or leather. But a little warning. Doctors recommend not wearing cock rings for longer than 10 to 30 minutes.
And for people out there who don't have penises, you could use a harness, also known as straps or strap-ons. Some can be worn like underwear, while others can go around your thigh or other parts of the body, and there are even strapless strap-ons.
Cool. Well, now that we've gone through a non-exhaustive list of sex toys, how do you even care for them?
Well, that depends on the type of sex toy. For most sex toys, all you need is some warm water and mild antibacterial soap. Wash them for 20 seconds, like how you would wash your hands, sing that happy birthday, and dry them with a clean towel. You can also get cleaners specially made for sex toys. Just be sure to read the ingredients list and make sure the cleaner is compatible with the material of your sex toy.
Also, avoid using bleach and other strong chemicals on your toys. Whatever method you use, read the instructions carefully and clean your toys after every new sexual encounter.
Yes, and like penises and vaginas, sex toys also need condoms. Remember, no glovin', no lovin'. Remember to pop a condom on your toys if you're sharing them to prevent the spread of sexually transmitted infections and diseases. And it is also important just to personally get tested regularly.
We'll have another episode soon about getting tested for STDs and STIs and how to schedule an appointment with the OBGYN. So stay tuned for that.
That actually looks like we're going to wrap up our show today, however, but we hoped you liked our very first episode ever.
And check back in with us because our next episode focuses on body positivity and confidence in young women. And we have a very special guest for you with that one.
Now, if there's a topic you want us to cover in the future, someone you want us to interview, feedback you want to provide, or if you just want to pop in and say hi, you can find us on Instagram. My personal handle is Tessa.Hughes, which is TESSA.HUGHESS.
And I can be found at Roselyn Romero, which is ROSELYN ROMERO. Until next time, this has been Body Language.